And amidst the doom and gloom of the skies outside, it's time to say a very cheery good morning to Mr. Richard Tice. Richard, how are you?
Good morning. Well, I'm cheery too, despite the weather outside, Mike.
And despite the madness, because it really is crazy today, the news.
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? It's getting madder and madder. What sort of world do we live in where all of a sudden the government, without any form of debate, and having spent months at the beginning of the year, various cabinet ministers of great repute, like Michael Gove, like Nadeem Zahawi, saying we weren't going to have vaccine passports. Actually, not only are they going to be brought in, but we're selfish now. Yes. Apparently, if we don't take the vaccine. I mean, I've been double jabbed, but we're selfish, and they're looking to, in a sense, continue the persecution of the young.
Yes.
So,
and they're also telling you that despite the fact you have been double jabbed, that doesn't actually help you in any way whatsoever, because you still can't go anywhere and you still can't do anything.
Yeah, there's that as well. But I wonder what it is this government and the Conservative Party have against children and young people. The idea that if you want to go and dance in a nightclub, that you've got to have a vaccine passport. The idea that if you want to go to university and, heaven forbid, attend a lecture. Yes. I mean, I know students quite often don't attend lectures, but if you want to attend a lecture, then you've got to have a vaccine passport. If you want to actually live in a halls of residence, I'm not sure whether they're going to have tents lined up on the pavement outside or whatever, but if you want to be a student in a halls of residence, you've got to have the vaccination and a vaccine passport.
And what do you think is this obsession of theirs now? Because it really is an obsession with people getting vaccinated.
Well, it's actually what it is. It is blackmail and coercion through the back door by making it effectively impossible to lead a normal, traditional life as a young person. Unless you've also been vaccinated. Look, we all know the vaccine is the way out of this crisis.
Well, that's what they keep telling us, but we've all now been vaccinated practically. I mean, nearly the whole country has been vaccinated in one way, shape or form, and yet we're still not able to go to France without coming back and quarantining. We're still not able to go to events without showing some kind of pass or other.
So what it shows us is that we have to learn, which I've been saying for months, you have to learn to live with this thing in the same way that we live with flu, in the same way that, sadly, we live with, difficult diseases like cancer.
All manner of diseases that you can catch.
You have to live with it. But, once you start coercing people to essentially to take a medicine, then actually you're into a whole different place. And where essentially the state becomes all-powerful. Whereas actually, it is one's own body, and one should have freedom of choice to do with what you want to with your body, whether you're going to put an ear piercing in or whether, it's your body. And I think it's deeply discriminatory.
Well, it is. And it's also a very slippery slope. I mean, Laura Dodsworth was in here the other day saying exactly this, that this is a very, very important time in our history, because if we let them do this, what are they going to do next?
Well, it's a very slippery slope. It's the thin end of a massive wedge. It's very divisive. And where does it stop? So you had Julia earlier this morning had a Labour MP talk about, vaccine passports were there, Labour's against them except for large gatherings. Well, he didn't know what a large gathering was.
So
that was pretty unhelpful.
Yeah.
But is it going to the cinema with 50 other people? Is it 10,000 people in a sports stadium?
Is it going into a restaurant that has more than 10 tables?
Yeah, you know where it's going. And then the other thing to remember, of course, is that no one actually knows how long the vaccines are going to be effective for. At what point do they actually become a bit less effective?
Yes.
Do the effects wear off, in inverted commas? And I had a conversation last week with Nadeem Zahawi, who started talking about the booster program would start.
And I hear that word quite a lot now.
Yeah, so again, there's been no debate or discussion about, how long the vaccines last and who's going to get boosted. And you can see this. It's this thin end of the wedge that before we know it, it's a bit like repainting the Forth Bridge, isn't it? We vaccinated everybody, and guess what, folks? Back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And I always say follow the money. And who makes the money here, Mike? If we're back to the beginning and we're having to reboost everybody who's previously been vaccinated, you know who makes the money?
The vaccine company.
It's the vaccine company. It's Big Pharma.
Right.
And
you retweeted a very interesting piece from the Mail today about a £100 million fine that's been given out for drug pricing sort of rules being broken.
Yeah, so look, we've got to be very careful about big pharma. And I've been very critical about the government and quangos, but credit where credit is due. There's a government quango that most of your splendid listeners quite sensibly would never have heard of, called the Competition and Markets Authority. They've actually been brilliant at spotting predatory drug pricing by some of the big pharma companies who are owned by some big private equity groups, including one called Cinven, which used to be part of the Coal Board Pension Fund. And the Competition and Markets Authority have fined this drugs company and Cinven £100 million because they were basically forcing up the price of drugs to the NHS 6,000% over give or take a decade. And then get this, the most despicable, the most immoral thing that they did was actually they were being paid by another drugs company not to sell drugs to the NHS, because therefore the first drugs company could charge a higher price because there was no competition. So they were literally being paid in order to boost the profits of another company, charging the taxpayer through the NHS even more money.
I mean, that should be an offence more than just a fine.
Well, I think it is, and actually, I'm not going to let this lie down. I'm going to actually write to Kwasi Kwarteng to see whether or not the directors should be disqualified as being directors or suspended. I'm going to write to the Financial Conduct Authority to see whether or not actually Cinven, a private equity group, should be authorised and regulated. Because I think this is such immoral, such despicable behaviour.
Well, it's taxpayers' money they're basically ripping off.
It's taxpayers' money they're trying to rip off.
Yeah.
And look, I'm in favour of the private sector and free markets, but there has to be a line of moral responsibility. Because
if you're watching, by the way, on TV, the tweet has just gone up. So the headline from Alex Brummer's commentary piece, not just venal but immoral and a betrayal of patients, and that's entirely correct.
And it's a fantastic piece. I urge everybody to read it in this morning's Daily Mail. But people we have to set examples where people, frankly, when they take the mickey and when they rip off taxpayers, that is crossing the line, particularly when it's involved with the NHS and people's health.
Because that'll be the next thing. If this vaccination lark becomes something which the government suggests we do on a regular basis, then the price will go up immediately, won't it? Because these companies have only been sort of nice to us, if you like, because they knew there was going to be such a mass rollout that they'd make a fortune.
And this is the thing, and this is the thin end of the wedge, and the rollout of the booster programme. And, yes, AstraZeneca are doing their vaccine at cost, which is fantastic during the crisis, but at some point the crisis comes to an end. It won't stay like that.
No.
And so it all changes. And, you look at, for example, Moderna, their share prices, not surprisingly, soared over the last 18 months. So, follow the money, think about this very, very carefully. And, there needs to be a proper democratic debate and discussion across the nation so everybody understands what's going on.
And my bet is, as well, if there is a booster plan for the autumn, a lot of people will just say no thanks, because I think people have been misled. They've been they feel like they've been led astray. They feel as though they were promised something and then not given it. So they'll go, really? Why should I get a booster? Maybe I won't bother.
Correct, because we were promised that there would be freedom.
Yeah.
We all remember Matt Hancock. Remember him?
Yes.
The bloke who said, once we're sadly...
Do you know, I was in a restaurant yesterday, and the guy who owns the restaurant said to me, there's only one person, if he ever came to my restaurant, that I would refuse to serve, and it's Matt Hancock.
Well, he
said even if Boris came, he said he could come and sit down. But
really?
if Matt Hancock came here, I would chase him down the street.
I think he's being generous.
Yeah.
But seriously, the ministers, they said cry freedom when the over 70s and the vulnerable were vaccinated. Then it was over 50s. Then it was all adults.
Right.
It never ends.
Well, I saw a Mail on Sunday, page 1 from December that somebody sent me, and it said 15 million jabs to freedom. Right? We've had about 50 million.
50 plus and counting.
Exactly. And it was meant to all be over by the end of February.
And I think you're right. I think that confidence is slipping in this process. And so if they, when they do this booster program, I think the take-up will be much, much less. And I think people will be really, really cautious. And look, we've seen, the reality is that, yes, the great news is vaccines mercifully reduce the severity of those that suffer badly with COVID, reduces hospitalizations and deaths. But we know it doesn't stop transmission. We know it doesn't stop you being infected with it. So you then say, well, hang on. So, yes, take it to reduce the risk, but it's not the total answer.
No.
So why do we need vaccine passports?
Yeah, but also what we know now about the hospitalisation figures is that a quarter of them, we believe, according to a report in the Telegraph this morning, are people who went into hospital for a different reason, were tested positive for COVID and then counted. Now, that doesn't mean a lot now, but as one of Julia's guests said this morning, That means back in January, when there was like 34,000 people in hospital, more than 8,000, possibly 9,000 of them were in for something completely different.
But the truth is that many of us knew that back then, but we weren't allowed to talk about it. The NHS, I think they knew that data back then, but I think they were terrified about releasing it.
Well, the one
and
place
the suppression of vitally important information, I think is one of the horrors of this crisis.
Absolutely, and also one of the horrors, one of the most positive places to get COVID was hospital. Forget about restaurants and bars and nightclubs and football matches and tennis matches. It was hospitals.
Yeah, no, I think actually that figure of 25% in many cases may well be an underestimate. Because we heard this time and time again, where people went into hospital for a completely unrelated treatment or illness or leg breaking or whatever, and ended up with a positive test. So this is the thing is, follow the data. The Prime Minister kept saying it's data, not dates. Well, that's why we need the data.
Yeah.
We need to know the data. For example, Mike, what's the average age of all these cases at the moment? Right. Actually, if it's, and I think it is anecdotally, young people, in a sense, that actually should give reassurance to the population that it's the young getting. We know that the young don't suffer from this virus anything like as badly. They might get a sniffle, they might get flu. And as doctors say to me, it's actually better for young people to get the natural antibodies than to be essentially coerced into having manufactured antibodies. So, I do think that the data is really, really important. And the government, there's so much more that they could give confidence to the nation by releasing more data and give more self-belief, but instead they do it very selectively, in a sense, to perpetuate that state of fear that Laura Dodsworth talked about.
Wouldn't it be good if we had opportunities to ask the government questions, because then we could have press briefings? But of course, the people that go to those press briefings don't ask the right questions, unfortunately.